because they're talking about the stuff which moves the needle. And the stuff which
And
moves the
that's how
needle.
you grow a country. That's how you grow an economy. That's how you make the pie bigger so you can spend on all your social initiatives that you need to spend on, like looking after disabled people with an NDIS and looking after healthcare properly, and looking after all the social services that you want to provide. You're only going to be able to do it if you've got money and you've got productive community.
We saw the Australians during the week, like the Australian government, very, very worried about an aluminium and steel tariff. And again, if they looked at the numbers, they would have been able to go to sleep quite well. Guess what? Australia's aluminium exporters are going duty-free in the Middle East and Asia, and they're ignoring Trump's tariffs, which are the value of aluminium ores to the United States in 2024, 60 million.
Tiny.
Exactly.
Well, g'day and welcome to episode 2 of The Other Side Unplugged, our cheap and cheerful no-frills show that enables us to just drop interviews and commentary on the news of the moment whenever the need arises for you. Make sure you do hit the subscribe button and the little notification bell on YouTube if you haven't done that already, so that you get notified when we post anything, because we're not posting The Other Side Unplugged on a regular time schedule. It's just going to come out whenever, so you do want to know when we've posted it. Of course, our regular show, The Other Side, our main show, comes out every second Friday night now. The last episode came out last Friday, February 7th. Next one will be February 21 next week. We're going to be coming to you from ARC in London, the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship Conference. Hope we're going to have a fair few good interviews for you and a pretty good show next Friday on The Other Side, which does drop regularly every second Friday at 7 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. But this is The Other Side Unplugged, and we are going to be talking this week and focusing on the cost of living crisis, because some new information has come out to reveal new research from both major parties that we're hearing about and sort of being reported a little bit in the news, but we're also hearing it coming loud and clear from internal party sources that there is no other issue, as we covered on The Other Side last week. There just is no other issue in this election except the cost of living crisis. And I'm very happy to say that I'm joined by Dr. Dan, the data man, Dan Petrie, from former Bloomberg and News Corp reporter and columnist. Dan, thanks a lot for joining us on the show.
Damian, it is a pleasure to be with you, and looking forward to getting into it. I've been doing a lot of charting, and yes, numbers are topical at the moment.
Great. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to getting into the charts as well. Before we get on to the cost of living stuff, which I think is hugely important, of course, for every Australian to understand, because we are being sold a truckload of political BS by various interests, especially the clowns like the Greens who think money grows on trees. And I'll get to that in a moment while we're having a look at some of the comments that Adam Bant made. And I want to get your comment on a bit of that too, mate, a little bit later on. But before we get into that, just a couple of other news stories that I want to touch on that erupted since last Friday's show, because they are too big to ignore. First of all, these wretched hate speech laws that we've seen pass through the parliament. Both parties, of course, both major parties, once again being a uni party, we're not getting the opposition that we should be getting from the centre-right party, the Liberal Party. They're just following along with Labor on these things. Everybody's terrified about sort of standing up against any of this. Otherwise, they'll get accused of being not supportive enough of the Jewish community suffering anti-Semitic attacks, not supportive enough of the Muslim community suffering Islamophobic attacks, not supportive enough of the trans community. So it's like, oh, we're too scared. We're still seeing that on the centre-right side of politics. But here we were fighting the misinformation and disinformation laws, the MAD laws last year, and we managed to kill them off temporarily. But now we've got these crazy new laws, again, brought in as some kind of great social service of keeping us all safe and protecting us all from all these horrible types of discrimination. But in reality, these laws are quite a serious infringement, or could be misused and become quite a serious infringement on our free speech in Australia, just like the MAD laws could have been. Just want to touch on some of the things that are in these laws, and I'll get your thoughts, Dan, in a minute. But
Sure.
Mandatory minimum sentences. This legislation introduces mandatory minimum sentences for offences such as displaying hate symbols, including Nazi salutes, and financing terrorist activities. mandatory sentences means the judge has no discretion to sort of say, the circumstances of this particular case mean that we probably should impose a slightly less sentence. But displaying hate symbols now carries a minimum mandatory sentence of 12 months in jail. Now, this is quite extraordinarily illiberal stuff we're seeing here. Also, we've got... Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
I was about to say, every teenager that decides, that gets a little bit interested in history, every time they design a bad hooked cross, are they off to the gulag? I mean, this is madness on a grand scale.
It really is extraordinary. Expanded offences in this include the criminalisation of the advocacy or use of violence based on race, religion, disability, ethnic origin, or gender identity. Now, that's okay if you're talking about physical violence, or maybe even if you're talking about incitement to physical violence. But again, this includes just the display of hate symbols. And so it does raise a whole bunch of questions. Protection of places of worship, which is fair enough. Specific measures aiming to protect places of worship from hate crimes, including new offences for obstructing access to these sites. And state-level initiatives, of course, in addition to all the federal laws that we're going to see. We've got individual states like New South Wales and Victoria introducing their own penalties for displaying Nazi symbols. And but it really is getting to the point where we have to make a distinction between, I think as Janet Albertson from The Australian wrote in December, well, Dan, she said, I think I've got the quote here somewhere. She said, since October 7, 2023, the Jewish community has been subjected to horrendous acts and words that incite violence. We need laws right now to combat that, but talk of laws to combat hate speech is confusing. We need to clearly distinguish incitement to violence from hate speech. The former must not be tolerated in a free society. The latter must be tolerated if a society is to remain free. I thought that was really well put, right?
Well, it is very well put. I mean, like and there are very clear distinctions. Incitement to violence is actually a call to action, and hate speech is incredibly subjective. I mean, so from that perspective, like one's subjective and could be a descriptor, but it's also hard to define. Incitement to violence has to satisfy a legal act, and that's really what we've seen. And the thing is, this in Australia, there seems to be this madness which permeates, which is we've got a problem. Let's create more laws, as opposed to looking at the existing laws to tighten them up and to exactly work within a framework. If anything, that's probably the great disaster we have in this country is the fact we seek to try, and government increasingly seeks to try to provide solutions to every ill there is. The fact of the matter is, when it comes to Jewish Australians, particularly, and particularly after October 7, they were subjected to many instances where there was an incitement to commit offence. And I don't think the Islamic community or Muslims in Australia, they've certainly not been immune from the local idiot that decides to drive a youth into a mosque. That is also an incitement if they're taking their cues from whichever reactionary does it. But there are laws which are already there for it. The idea of hate speech is another way of muzzling people. And the thing is, it might be well intended, but the fact of the matter is this: when you start trying to muzzle speech, you create all sorts of problems. And I think that's really where, in Australia, there does seem to be gigantic overreach, and it seems to be culturally ingrained in us at the moment. I think that's part of our big problem, is the fact that there's probably a few Australians looking overseas in America going, they actually push back against this madness. Yet in Australia, it seems very much don't rock the boat. And again, it's really the industry of government just seems to get larger and larger in Australia.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? I mean, we'll talk about the cost of that and the impact on the cost of living and inflation in a moment. It's this ever-expanding government control, always all this stuff being introduced under the guise of safety, the guise of keeping us safe, the guise of improving our society and protecting people, We've seen a lot of Jewish associations, almost all the Australian Jewish associations have come out and said, we need tougher laws, we need more of this, we need more of this, which is astounding to me. The Australian Jewish Association, which is the slightly more centre-right conservative Jewish organisation, has come out and said no. There was an editorial in the Australian, I think, just last week about this, saying that, you know, Robert Gregory, the head of that organisation, saying, no, this is not the right way to handle the anti-Semitism problem, and basically pointing to the same sort of thing that Janet Albrechtsen was saying, which is that you need to make a distinction between hate speech and incitement to violence and violence, which are serious. Even incitement to violence is a little grey sometimes.
Oh, it's very grey, and of course, you know, like there've been several broadcasters who have fallen foul of this law, and again, you know, like it's the subjectivity which can also be problematic. To take your point about, yeah, we now seem to be in the great words crisis of the 20s. 10 years ago, it was cartoonists being, you know, in their place of work being mowed down by gunmen if they defamed the Prophet Muhammad. That was the great cartooning crisis. I mean, it wouldn't be, if it wasn't so sad, it wouldn't be, you know, Charlie Hebdo, for example, which is the obvious example I'm pointing to, is a far left publication that lampoons the Catholic Church, for example. But you don't see, you know, the Knights of the Vatican, you know, on march ready to destroy their enemies, so to speak. I mean, it's just a fallacy. And so, yeah, sadly, this tends to be this overreach of government, and it really is incredibly tough in this part of the world. Particularly, the United Kingdom seems to indulge with this fantasy of trying to control lives, and that's kind of, I think, Damian, that's where we're at in terms of, you know, Canada, Australia, and indeed the United Kingdom. We seem to be, how can we over-egg it? And government has to get out of people's lives, and there might be things which are unpalatable. But that's what actually a free society is all about. And part of that free society is to live and let live. And that's one of the creeds, and we just don't, and we seem to be getting away from that. That's a madness. But again, you know, like this is where we find ourselves in 2025.
Yeah, it's scary because, I mean, you see what's happened in the UK, and you've seen people being sent to jail for stuff that they posted online.
Absolutely.
That is clearly not incitement to violence. It's been interpreted as incitement to violence, but it isn't. And then we've got these laws that go even further to the sort of grey area of hate speech. You know, this whole idea of what is hate speech, what isn't hate speech, and the determinants of hate speech being the offence taken by the third party that's attacked, rather than whether there's an objective judgment made about the actual message itself.
You know, in my lifetime, you know, like these types of problems, the things they try to solve ultimately are the problems they end up creating. You know, sometimes there are things you cannot control about human behavior, and ultimately one of them is what they think and feel and say. And sorry, but this is, you know, there is precedent, and you know, the outcome we will see, and they'll be messy. And again, I think these laws will be exposed for how stupid they are. But again, there'll be another set of laws which add to already a burgeoning set of laws, many of which are redundant already in Australia and indeed the West.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
Mate, I'm just terrified about the fact that there's no strong opposition to this. I mean, we just see the Liberal Party again rolling over and saying, yep, We don't want to be on the
but
wrong side of this debate. We're looking down the barrel of a victory in May or whenever the election's going to be, and we don't want to rock the boat. So we'll just
do,
go along
do,
with this one.
do you know what? When you stand in the middle of the road, I don't have to quote conservative leaders to do it, but I mean, that's what they're doing. Like, I mean, the problem with being too safe, and we just spoke about this at length during the Queensland election, was, of course, you get into power and then what? It's an empty goblet, right? And the people that put you there, are demanding action. But when you went there in the platform of nothing, you know, the goodwill dries up pretty quickly. And I think
Well,
that's really,
Trump can do the things he's doing now because he said he was going to do them.
well, look, I mean,
He's got a mandate.
well, look, I mean, in his last month, I mean, he signed an executive order about women's sport. I mean, it almost seems absurd. 20 years ago, he wouldn't have even been talking about this. You and I would be laughing about it. But it became quite serious. You had men competing in boxing matches at the Olympics. You had, in the Riley Gaines case with that Leah Thomas, an absurd situation where a full man who was ranked 400th in America for his swimming, um, he wasn't very good at the elite level. Sorry, but that's just the reality. So he decides to call himself a woman. As a result of that, he dead heated with the actual biological female, and the absurd situation which followed was that she had to hand over the her trophy. It just is incredibly maddening. But again, you've had in the case of America, they've said, the world stepped back. The world's biggest economy's gone. No, we've had it, and now we have a situation where Donald Trump's provided the blueprint for conservatives, and the Democrats are what 30%, and they've got problems.
Yeah, yeah. But it doesn't seem as though the Liberal Party yet are heeding the message. At least we're certainly not seeing that, even from Peter Dutton, who.
Well, the thing is that the Liberal Party will have a soft 35, 40%, right? But if you stand for something, you'll get a hell of a lot more than playing it safe.
You don't think you'll lose the sort of centre-left vote? Alienate that, because that's what they're terrified of, right? And we had, you're right, we had this discussion about the Queensland election. It turned out we were probably wrong in that they did get over the line with a decent majority.
Yes, but like, I mean, look what they're up against, in terms of they've inherited, in the Queensland case, they've inherited a state which is technically, it has a headline debt north of, $200 billion by 2028. Half of that will be government generated debt, so they won't be able to push it onto state utilities. It's a pretty reckless thing, and you know what? And they've got no desire to change it. So they're a bit of a nothing. They've got in. They've just changed the jockey. That's all. In the case of the Australian example, you've actually got the federal sovereign government. They raise bonds. They do all sorts of things. But Australia, for example, we don't talk about the economy anymore. The Conservatives don't talk about the economy anymore. And if you start looking at the numbers beyond the reason people talk about legacy media and all that is because they're fixated about issues which they talk to each other about. I mean, boys and girls locker rooms and all this type of stuff. But for most people, and that is great fodder, right? But the appetite for most people is, what is the government of the day going to do to fix my lot in life? Are they prepared to take on the taxes? Are they prepared to take on this ridiculous level of operating? I could reel off right now levels and levels of legislature which make no sense. Why, for example, do we have 7 IT systems across states? Why, for example, do we have 100,000 bureaucrats for health? It makes no sense. And so the fact of the matter is, you've got that Elon Musk with the DOGE doing all sorts of things, but that's creating headlines because it's a case of it's answering a whole lot of whys, and it's posing a whole lot of questions which are creating anger, and they are creating thought-provoking things. But that's what's happening. And so in the case of Mr. Dutton, and he is quite a nice guy. I've met him a couple of times, but seize the day. That's really kind of what it is. And so centre-left governments around the world look rudderless because they're focused on really, like stuff which moves the needle. It moves the needle in the inner city and a few people sipping a hot drink. But for the 90% that aren't being spoken to, and that's also being reflected in many of the media outlets, They write stuff about, today we had a climate change announcement. I mean, who cares, right? The truth of the matter is this. I've got a cafe, or I've got a bakery, or I've got a plumbing business, or a plumbing supplies business, or four-wheel drive shop, or whatever, right? I can't afford to staff it, keep the lights on, or have water to it and buy stock. Can't afford it, right? And according to the ATO, the average business person, this is the ATO numbers, like, are hovering between $70,000. So the public servant average salary is what, 100,000? The small business person, according to ATO averages, is 30% below that.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
so
they're
work
taking
it out.
risk.
They're
Why would you
taking
bother?
risk. Why would you bother? Why on earth would you bother investing in Australia when the most lucrative thing you can do is work for the state?
Yeah, yeah. Mate, I want to get into all of that cost of living stuff in just a second, but before we do, there is another story that's related to that first, the hate speech story that emerged this week, which, I mean, it just blows me away when you put the two stories together, the fact that they've happened concurrently. And this second one's gotten very little coverage. I think a little bit of coverage on Sky News and online. Milk Bar TV, I think, have covered it pretty well. But one of the things that the government and the opposition have both said about these hate speech laws is, don't worry, because they'll be enforced properly. Trust the bureaucrats. The bureaucrats won't overstep the mark. But this week, we had a classic case which has exposed a practice by the eSafety Commission and the eSafety Commissioner, Julian Grant. It has exposed a practice that they've been doing, which is far from something that any of us should be trusting. The commission was apparently using has been deliberately issuing informal notices, takedown notices to social media companies, and deliberately using informal notices, because informal notices can't be challenged, or so they argue. They believed. So it's a little bit of a sneaky way, really, to kind of go about getting stuff taken down, putting pressure on social media companies without giving them an opportunity to be able to formally counter that in a court of law or in a tribunal or anything. So because these notices to take down offensive social media posts were informal, nobody could actually do anything about them. And of course, the social media companies obviously feeling a lot of pressure to go ahead and do it. So it's really a way of the eSafety Commission avoiding transparency and accountability. Now, this is all just come out because there was a case brought against the eSafety Commissioner in a tribunal that was won by the person who brought the case.
Yes,
and that was an activist by the name of Celine Baumgarten from a group called Gays Against Groomers. So this is an organisation of gay people who fight against grooming and creepy stuff being done to kids. Case in point to what you were saying about the weird stuff going on, she put up a post in May last year. So this was only 8 months ago, sharing what was already publicly available information. It wasn't stuff that hadn't already been in the news. She was just sharing the existing information about a Melbourne primary school queer club and its organiser. Yeah, you heard me right. A Melbourne primary school queer club. Those 4 words really shouldn't be in the same sentence at any point in time, in my view.
Well, but this goes to the point, what we were talking about before, and, again, I think the eSafety Commissioner, has, she must assess her mandate and what she's actually employed to do, but she's employed by the state with not the powers she's assuming and executing upon. They're questionable and they're contestable. And that's clearly the case at the moment. And that was, geez, I tell you what, it's a brave new world. But a queer club for primary school, I mean, that should, that
right.
is.
And let's remember, right, that the eSafety Commission was originally set up as the Children's eSafety Commission by the Liberal Party, and then
correct.
changed to the eSafety Commission for All of Us, the great censor for all of us by the Labor Party government.
Well,
she should be. Well, my point is, she should be protecting the children. Instead, she's on the other side of this.
But I mean, I could put it another way. If it was the heterosexual club, I mean, for primary school. I mean, these are big themes, right? For children. Now, I'm a parent. We're both parents, right? I would be deeply concerned. That was, if any type, these are conversations which are delicate. They require parents, not the eSafety Commissioner. They require parents. And again, you know, um, individual sexuality is ultimately a private thing. It really is. And I know we all know many fine gay people. There's no question about that. But the thing is, there are many who are also feeling deeply uncomfortable with a level of, going into people's lives and you know, for the eSafety Commissioner to be in this situation, to be arbitrating upon this, I thought madness. And it was obviously, the common sense Kool-Aid for one is starting to be drunk by some magistrates out there. But this was madness, and should never have even got there in the first place.
So, she basically had the post that Gays Against Groomers and this woman, Celine Baumgarten, put up was drawing attention to that story that it was already out there about the Melbourne Primary School Queer Club and its organiser. And it was the organiser that was offended. But she was also identified already in the media. But Baumgarten's post was geo-blocked on X after the eSafety Commission sent one of these informal notices. And I'm just taking this from an article by Rebecca Barnett on Substack. Is a very good writer, and she reports on a lot of this stuff. I urge you to follow her. She's fantastic. But the post was geo-blocked on X after eSafety sent an informal notice alleging that her post appeared to intimidate and harass the complainant. Now, the regulator, the eSafety Commission, admitted during proceedings in this tribunal that it did not meet the legal threshold for removal. But they still issued, some mid-level bureaucrats gone and issued this informal takedown order. Well, what's the social media company going to do? They're going to go, well, okay, we better do what the eSafety Commissioner says. We know about the fines that they can lump on us if they,
But again, the eSafety Commissioner, this goes back to, again, the group, Gays Against Groomers. I mean, highlighting that is actually a newsworthy story. Even if it is on social media, it's a newsworthy story. It's actually worth consideration. It's not up to the eSafety Commissioner in this case, and on balance, and would a reasonable person expect this to be reported on? Of course they would. I mean, like, these are the thresholds, and I'm not a lawyer, but I mean, they'd be the first things that would be tested and asked of me if I was submitting a column on such a thing. They'd ask me, is this that? And and I think in this one here, like, you got the eSafety Commissioner or that department clearly making a judgment call based on someone's protest.
Yeah. But making it this way, I mean, it's so, I mean, this is the sort of thing that a bureaucracy will get up to. It's not just the fact that they're intervening. That in itself is bad, as you point out, but it's the way they're intervening and using this manipulative approach of informal notices so that they can't be challenged.
Well,
it's real abuse of the regulations.
It's abuse of the regulation, but also at the same time, it's a pretty aggressive tactic, isn't it?
Oh, it's
yeah, it's informal until it's formal. That's
I mean, the way that the woman that was Baumgarten put it on Sky News on the Outsider show this week was she said they rely on what they call informal notices to send to social media companies, and then they just use their aura of authority to censor posts that don't meet the required standards in the Online Safety Act. But this wasn't even a case where she hadn't met that wasn't even, the standards weren't even there, and they're still doing this.
Well,
and it's not the first time that eSafety has been pulled up for overstepping its statutory bounds, because last year a judge ruled that their attempt to enforce a global ban on that footage of the stabbing incident of Bishop Mari.
Oh, that's right. And then that was discontinued. Yeah. And that was discontinued against Musk from memory. I think they discontinued the case. But I mean, like, again, as unpalatable as that was, again, is it a threshold which I debate it. I mean, I think that was actually newsworthy enough to be. I know we live in a brave new world, but I would say that it probably that footage should have been on there. It's just again, um, they seem poorly advised. Would be the most
Yeah,
generous assessment I
well,
could give them. But anyway,
in my opinion, good advice would be to shut the damn thing down, but we're not going to see that. Peter Dutton has
well,
said that he loves her. Well, not that he loves her, but he likes it.
the thing
Likes
is,
her a
like,
lot.
but these they want to be a regulator, right? But they're currently coming across like a policeman. Part of
Mm.
regulation is working with those who form the environment upon which you're wanting to regulate, and that requires ongoing dialogue. And I think they've probably failed that first bit
Oh,
by
they don't want to
issuing
be a
notice.
regulator. They want to be. They want to be. Yeah, no, she wants to be a police officer. She wants to be banging the drum. She's got, wants to get in there and attack the social media companies. It seems pretty strongly.
Very much so.
I'll just read a bit more out of Rebecca Barnett's article. She says during the proceedings, Inman Grant argued that informal cooperative mechanisms are preferable to resorting to eSafety using its coercive powers. So she's trying to justify this use of these informal notices. But Justice Kairu, who was the justice presiding over this, said that the eSafety's reliance on the informal notice process as its predominant regulatory mechanism resulted in a less transparent system that's failed to strike any balance between the community's right to free speech and its right to be protected from cyber abuse material targeted at an Australian adult. And the judge said that in operating this informal notice system, the eSafety Commissioner has acted outside of her statutory powers. So that's pretty serious stuff.
I think I go back to they're not well advised.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, the thing is, platforms can be fined, right, up to $165,000 if they don't comply with a removal notice from eSafety. So they're going to err on the side of caution if they get an informal notice.
I'll tell you what, $165,000 still buys you a lot of legal protection if you want to challenge that. Maybe the stick's not
Fair
big
enough. Maybe. Anyway, God, don't give them any ideas.
The Other Side with Damian Coorey is Australia's best independent news commentary show, bringing you up to speed and diving deep on the issues that matter most in around an hour, with a new episode dropping every second Friday. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. Damian will drop comments on the news whenever something important happens, and in-depth interviews with people who have real insight and value to add. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame, and follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side.
All right, mate. Let's move on to what we're here to talk about, which is the issue of all of the election. So we've both seen some coverage on this, and Four Corners did a piece last week on how this is just by far the standout issue, according to a lot of the research that's being done right now. I know from research I've heard about from the conservative side of politics that cost of living is off the charts, and it's certainly coming out in the Labor research as well in terms of what people give a stuff about for this election. There just is no other issue. So it's really going to come down, I said on the show last week, it's going to come down to which party manages to convince people what those causes of cost of living are. And I basically brought it down to 3 things: cost of energy, cost of labour, and cost of government. Would you agree with that assessment? Would you add anything? Would you take anything away? I mean, is that the 3 biggies?
The 3 biggies. I think there's a couple of things which I'd also add to that is that, the inputs you can't control in some ways. I mean, like, for example, Australia imports a heck of a lot of petroleum now because there's not much onshore refining. We've got population bases clustered around 3 big regional areas in southeast Queensland, the Greater Sydney area, including the central and Illawarra coast, and of course Victoria, Melbourne, where it goes really out to Geelong if it wants to, right? So the reality is that you've added a whole bunch of population to pre-existing infrastructure. You're not really growing an economy, and those things such as land, capital, labour are no longer available. So for all this population you've brought in, we're not developing much. Like we don't have really a story to tell. Like, I mean, we're still a farm and quarry economy, but no one wants to live in the regions. And despite those things, they're not massive employers. The thing is, you've got the industry of government. Now, I talk about it a lot, right? But you've got 1 in 4 workers that work for the state, or yep, work for government, right? So, well, it's actually, I think it's about, it's like, well, you're getting close to 1 in 5, right? And then because, yeah, and so exactly, and then the next thing that which flows onto that is, why would you start a small business when there is no way you can compete with a state government or a local government? I mean, their conditions are frightfully good, right? And like,
That's a
so
bloody good point you make. And I don't think enough people realise, right? The government doesn't just, like, when it plays in an industry, it isn't just, the fact that, oh, should a government be playing in an industry? Should a government be, involved in anything? It becomes a barrier to entry for others, right? It becomes a competitive problem for other people.
so when the Queensland state government changed, right, instead of keeping on a bunch of quite professional and senior communications people, but because they're tarred with the Labor brush, the government of the day goes, well, we need new press secs, and they go and plunder what's left of the Courier Mail, for example. I mean, the Premier's department in Queensland, for example, is now what? They've got a much bigger communications team than the newsroom of the Courier Mail. And
Yeah, the
you know,
propaganda machine's bigger than the news organisation.
well, they make the news, and so but like in the case of if you've got, for example, like this idea that Australia needs to become a manufacturing superpower, there's this nobility associated with being manufacturing. We can't do it. We don't have the electricity, which is affordable, and we don't have the labour force available to do it. And we're at the bottom of the planet. And the stuff we do produce, for example, is that upstream stuff, the raw material, which can be basically produced elsewhere a lot cheaper. And yes, there might be vagaries around what people are paid, but Australians generally, particularly in the government sector, are paid far too much next to their counterparts. That's not a slight, but why they pay too much? Because we pay far too much in income tax. Why do we pay far too much in income tax? Is because we're all afraid of the GST boogeyman. The reality is we've got a tax system which doesn't work.
Well, mate, I've got some numbers. I did some numbers. And I like numbers. We like numbers here. So I just want to throw these out. So the spending, the federal government spending is $770 billion or thereabouts. It varies, of course, from year to year, and of course, it doesn't always match exactly. But $773 billion a year is the spending of our federal government. The spending of state governments is about $400 billion. There's a bit of crossover and overlap there because, of course, in Australia, the federal government collects all the taxes and distributes money to the states. The amount of money that they distribute to the states is about $237 billion out of that 770.
That's correct.
The states raise the rest, right? So the actual total government spending in Australia is about $930 billion. 930. We're pushing the $1 trillion cost of government.
Exactly.
Which is high, right? I mean, America's high. I mean, America's, I think it's a 10 US trillion, which is 15 Australian trillion.
So Australia's got the vagary of 3 levels of government, right? So 27% of GDP is your tax take. 27, 28% is your tax take. Yeah, and then You add in state government, right, through all the stealth taxes, and then of course you got the Red Joes and all that. Remember, you've got 7 different registrations, and then you've got 7 different IT systems, you've got 7 different laws, you've got for everyone who bangs on about crime data, there's not one consistent national set of monthly crime statistics. Why? Because they're categorized differently across states. And so the actual ability to get things done, like you mentioned before, like we can't come up with really funky new businesses because we've got a generation now where we rely on our technology advances to come from overseas. Things such as ZPOS, for example, was built in Australia. Was made in, like in the Wi-Fi and all that. Those things came here. But the thing is, we'd actually like, the idea of startups is a bunch of people in bean bags and, turtleneck skivvies talking about drones delivering pizzas, and that's a level of innovation. When really, the R&D rort, and that's what it is basically keeping a bunch of zombie businesses open. The research stuff should be for genuine STEM-related, research endeavors that are going to change the world, as opposed to this idea of, YouTubers graffitiing on whatever wall they want to. I mean, there is no, people want to buy into a plan. What's the plan for Australia, right? If it's farm and quarry, great. Okay, let's go for it. But, you know, the knowledge industries, the things that the country wants to do, they can't. And as a result, all we're doing, our measure of wealth is what we can buy and sell existing property structures for. That's it.
Yeah. Just on the point of government taxation, right? So our taxation level now, I think, is about 800. About 800 billion. I note that governments are spending 930 billion, so there's a $130 billion gap there, which is just adding to our debt tally, which
Absolutely.
is already another story. But that 800 billion tax, I don't think a lot of people realise that only 10 years ago it was 430 billion.
There's
It's only been
430
30% inflation, mate. So it should only have gone up about 120. It should only be at 550 billion.
I think what people are not seeing in that is the bracket creep that gets collected now. The number of people that have moved into those higher tax brackets. The other one too is the cost of Australia's to do the pension system or Centrelink or whatever like that. That is expensive. But here's the other one which no one ever thinks about. Australia's much vaunted superannuation system where you basically we the mug hand over our 13% of what we earn or 12% of what we earn every year, put it in a black box and can never touch it again. And if you do touch it, you're considered a crank or a crazy or grossly irresponsible for deciding what you want to do with your own money. It's a very, very expensive system to oversee. It's a very, very expensive system in terms of the goodies which come with it. Again,
But it gives a lot of power to those superannuation funds and a lot of them are industry funds, and we've talked about that in the past.
Damian, all it does is it just reinstates, or just basically reinforces, I should say, the oligopoly mentality we have in this country. We don't have the entrepreneurial mindset, which is set to really explode in the United States, because there is a thing where, let's get it going. Let's do something different.
There's no incentives here for business at all. I mean, small business. I'm in small business. All I do is pay tax. I feel like I'm putting my hand in my pocket for thousands of dollars of tax every other week.
So I collected 2 invoices today, and so basically, like, this is not huge money, but $3,000. I have to set aside half of that for tax, just because I'm not sure. You know what I mean? Because it's a madness. So
I just want to reinforce that number again. Total taxation in Australia, 2013-2014, $430 billion. Total taxation in Australia today, $800 billion. There's only been 30% inflation in that period, in that 10 years, yet our tax has almost doubled. It's almost doubled.
Exactly. It's almost doubled.
So where the hell is it going, and what are they bloody spending it on? You did mention income tax and bracket creep, but income tax is only $250 billion. It's only $250 billion. So it's probably not mainly that, right? I mean, a lot of it would be.
Well, income tax is the biggest. So income tax is the biggest one of that. I think it's a bit higher. I think it's about 300 billion. Yeah. I think so, and I think the corporate tax rate's around 100. So the corporate tax collect is around 150. The GST is about 80. That's just off the, and then
Yeah, GST was 73, I think, last year. Yeah.
and
So
so
78.
and so the receipts they get from mining and resources and natural gas are very, very high, and that's the problem again. Like Venezuela.
Don't tell the Greens that, right? The Greens will tell you there's no corporate tax, there's no mining tax, there's no royalties. You know, we've got to. Last week on the show, in fact, why don't we play it now, mate? I might just share the screen if I can and see if we can play this clip of Adam Bant that I played on the other side on Friday. We'll get your thoughts on it. But this is him speaking at the press club, the National Press Club lunch. I think it was late last year, right? But he was doing his kind of big spiel, picking out, you know, it's more or less, here's what we believe, the Communist Manifesto for the next federal election. Mm-hmm. So let's just have a look at this one if we can.
The major parties also hate the climate movement so much that they're throwing peaceful protesters in jail. Our coal and gas exports cause more damage to the world than any other country bar Russia. But instead of being concerned by the big corporations making billions burning up our future, they're locking up the people who are prepared to get in the way. But the climate movement still grows. There is also a growing movement fighting for control of rents to bring down the cost of housing for all. A movement fighting for mental and dental care for all. A movement fighting for free university, TAFE, and to wipe all student debt. A movement fighting for raising income support so that no one in this wealthy country of ours lives in poverty. A movement to make price gouging from the banks, supermarkets, and power corporations illegal to bring down the cost of essentials for us all. A movement for publicly owned renewable energy and an end to more coal and gas. A movement for peace. A movement for equality of all. A movement for treaty and truth. It's time to reject politics as usual. It's rigged. We need a new politics which puts people first and which tackles the big problems that we face. And this isn't just a dream. Currently, the Greens hold balance of power in the Senate. This election, we will be running the biggest campaigns in Green history to win lower house seats too. There are at least 5 new seats across the country where we believe we're in with a strong chance.
But it isn't just a dream, Dan. It isn't just a dream. It's it's a nightmare. It isn't just a dream. We can make this vision happen, this vision of complete totalitarian fascist, government control.
Damian, I thought that was delivered. That speech may have been delivered from the yurt. I mean, that was just...
But the problem is, mate, well, not most, all right. Well, most people under 30, but a significant number of Australians will buy that narrative. I mean, they'll think that sounds just lovely.
Until they go overseas and travel and see the world and they go, right. Everything Mr. Bant just spoke about then is funded by resources. Okay, the income tax we hand back to the government, or effectively we work for 3 months of the year for nothing, or 4 months in some cases, 5, and hand back to the government, which is our income tax. The royalties and that we collect from the resources, that's the cream which pays for the largesse, which pays for the madness. You know, in a way it's a curse, because if anything, resources basically mask the problems of not reforming when you get these windfalls, and it's cringeworthy and embarrassing. I don't know when both sides of politics get up and they say it's our strong management that's done this. No, it's not. It's the fact that it's a gigantic landmass with a lot of natural minerals, and it's the dumb luck which allows it to happen. I mean, you can
drive in spite of your management and your interference that we're still able to function.
But you know, just listening to that, then, you know, like this idea of, like you can't make it up. I mean, rent caps. I mean, are you nuts? It doesn't work. And, you know, no credible economist or no credible person has ever lent their name to such things. And so, you know, sadly, again... But
can you imagine the impact of rent caps on the housing crisis, Adam?
Well, it would just, you know, but again, it's sent from the position of privilege. Here's the thing: people in the Greens, they like to rally against the corporate Australia, or the business person, and they can put up the visage of a bunch of bulldog bankers, smoking cigars. But the truth of the matter, the business person in Australia is actually paid well below, in most cases, and pays themselves last, most of their staff, right? And they're navigating an incredibly complex tax system that is, you know, that is punitive and punishes risk. And the fact of the matter is, the big draw is the industry at government, and that's reflected in the fact that, where does the population live? In the cities. Why? Because that's where the honeypot is, and we pay for it. And until we actually start getting smarter and being able to have dangerous debates, such as, really, should we abolish the states? Should we actually have regional councils instead? Should we have, local hospital boards and education boards? Should we actually drive competitive federalism? Then you're only going to get more of the same. It's not a continent of a big brown land. It's a thin green strip, primarily on the east coast of Australia, and that's it. And the fact of the matter is, you've got all these places are full, and they're not moving the needle. And why not? Because we don't have the capability, because we're not producing that next generation capable of doing what we're saying to people is, isn't it great? And we're lulling ourselves into that, this idea that we're so smart when actually sadly, we just don't seem to have the, I would say, the drive to really change. What could be the most successful nations in history have been the ones where it's been the populace that's gone out and thrived and shown individualism. And if that's not championed at some point, then you get what we got now: collective failure.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said there about the state, like driving competitive federalism, because a lot of the argument for keeping the states that you hear from people, particularly on the libertarian side of politics and that sort of thing, they say, no, we've got to have the states because the states...
Why? They're just meandering.
It creates competitive. It creates, state A is acting like Dan Andrews. Then state B can be doing something different, and if it succeeds,
but again, what's the line? It's just like a line in Albury-Wodonga. It's just a line. That, like, it doesn't solve cancer. That particular line just happens to be a line on a map. No one lives there. Like no one. It's.
You're saying that competitive energy could come about from regional councils.
Absolutely. I mean, it's absurd.
You'd still have the same sort of, no, we're pushing back on the federal government. It's pushing back on the feds, I think, is what the libertarians worry about, that if you don't have the states.
Well, the thing is, I think they need to get out more in terms of, like, and if, and the getting out part is the case of, the point I'm making is the people in Cairns, for example, have no self-determination. Why? Because they answer to the capital in Brisbane.
Well, they got the double whammy, right? They've got to listen to Brisbane and Canberra. So, I mean, it's like, if you're in remote Queensland or far north Queensland, it's like, give us a break. I mean...
But it makes it impossible. There's no significant self-determination for these places. And the self-determination would actually be good for media, be good for, banks and all sorts of things. So there we are. But there's my hot take.
Yeah, all right. Okay, so just coming back to the main drivers of this cost of living crisis, it's not supermarket price. Let's just put that out there for once and for all and kill it, shall we? It's not supermarket price gouging. That's just plays into it's not government. It's the corporations, the big evil corporations, which government likes to drive. So all the parties are pushing that nonsense. Okay, I mean, I'm not making excuses for some of the behaviour of the supermarkets, by the way, because there are issues. But I'm just saying that that's not our cost of living problem driver. I want to talk to you particularly about energy, because I know you're a bit of an expert in this area. So tell us a little bit about the narrative we often hear is that our mining industry, our coal industry, energy-related coal industry, our gas industry and everything are all getting away with blue murder, and they're sending money overseas, and Australians are not getting the royalties. That's a bit of a myth, isn't it, Dan?
It is. I mean, the coal story is... I'm not. Well, I mean, the coal story is Australia's half Australia's coal exports are met coal, which make the wind turbines which fall over in Victoria. It's steel making coal. The energy coal, which comes from New South Wales, goes to Japan primarily, and that goes a lot for their heating, and it's a redundancy measure. And the gas is part of a deal which the Labor government under Rudd sold for a decade, probably for too cheap in the end, but it's tied to the oil price, and that's it. So they're not getting away. If they're getting away with blue murder, the projects would be lining up. They're not. In the case of Queensland, those met coal projects no longer are happening, and why not? Because 40% is your top marginal rate of royalty tax. You'll pay 20% just in government levy. That's not corporate levy, government royalty levy at the state level before you even submit your financials.
Yeah, well, this is something about the free market and pricing mechanisms and all of that that would make a Green's head explode, simple brain explode. Let's just break it down in simple terms for people. Mining's an industry, gas exploration, extraction is an industry. These industries it has to be attractive for them to come and do projects.
Yeah, have to have
and your point is they're not turning up to do projects.
No, they're like, and I'll tell you what, you can download the data tomorrow or tonight, but that is the fact. The projects are no longer happening. And in the iron ore case, which has been the dumb luck driver for the last decade, 2 decades really, but that's tied to a property market in China which has got some serious problems. So you've got a pretty linear, pretty narrow economy, and like these things where the Greens think it's infinite money and print your money forever. I hate to tell you, but the numbers don't tell you that. And again, it also shows, for example, how susceptible we are to the headline in this country. So we talk about.
Well, the Greens don't deal in reality, and they just pump these messages out.
Well, I'll tell you what, there's a lot of people in the Labor Party and even the Liberal Party. I don't know if they're necessarily that close to the detail, but they need to be.
Well, nobody's trying to counter the narrative, right? No, they're all out there saying because everybody in government and politics benefits from business is evil narrative, right? So let's push the business is bad narrative. The villain is the corporation. The villain is the supermarket. The villain is the blah, 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 and on it goes. And so it's an easy sell. Most people go, yeah, corporations, evil, great, okay, get it. These are the good guys, they're the bad guys. We'll just vote for the good guys. It's very simplistic, but that's kind of where we're at. And we've still got 10 to 12% of people showing up in every poll saying they're going to put the Greens first, which just blows my mind. And we are heading down we're heading for a coalition Green Labor government. That's what we're heading for.
I think my personal take is I think the Liberals will probably be the dominant party in lower house. I think the Teals might get a bit of a whack because they don't have anything to run on. Well, but they've got nothing to run on. But they've celebrated a whole bunch of things. They've like tax extensions and credits and all that. That's all done by the Labor Party. But whatever they run on.
I think I saw a chart the other day showing that they vote with the Greens 80% of the time. I mean, that could be just mostly because they're crossbenchers, but they are voting with the Greens 80% of the time.
So was Allegra Spender. So Spender's come up with a pretty good thing to do with the GST reform. Good work. It is good work. She's actually, an economist. But one thing, she's running out of puff. But the thing is, but that's what she should be championing. Yeah, and kudos to her.
More of that would give them. But credit's due on that one.
But Zoe Daniel puts a thing out on LinkedIn about being people first and people driven, and what does that mean? Nothing, because it's platitude politics, and platitude politics, as we've seen in America, is failing on a rather grand scale. Simple as that.
Well, we had the ultimate platitude candidate in Kamala Harris, and you know what? We saw what happened there. So she was seen as a vacuous moron.
I watched Trump on the campaign trail, and there was I think it was CNN had him talking to a plumbing supply, and Musk was in the conversation. They were just talking to an average guy. on the street. Here was the difference, right? But the guy talking to Trump goes, "I got all these labour supply problems," and he's talking about his business. And Trump says, "I know what you mean. I had something not so long ago with what I was doing." I probably should have seen it then, but I went, "Oh heck, he's going to win because they're talking on the level. The vote is not some idiot to take a platitude. They're a fellow American trying to make their way." And that's how they've got it, right? Because they're talking about the stuff which moves the needle. And the stuff which moves
And that's how you grow a country. That's how you grow an economy. That's how you make the pie bigger so you can spend on all your social initiatives that you need to spend on, like looking after disabled people with an NDIS and looking after healthcare properly, and looking after all the social services that you want to provide. You're only going to be able to do it if you've got money and you've got productive community.
And and basically, and people, that's right. But people have to be motivated to do that, right? And I'd say at the moment you're probably running out of the bandwidth in the cities to do it, because if the hottest game in town's government, you've got to find places which are not so hot to make. So there's that. I mean, but we saw the Australians during the week, like the Australian government, very, very worried about an aluminium and steel tariff. And again, if they looked at the numbers, they would have been able to go to sleep quite well, but they didn't. So,
Mate, we had, look, I mean, let's look at those numbers, actually, because you've got a chart, I know. So if you wouldn't mind throwing that up, mate. Because I think it's just so pertinent to the fact that we bang on about all this crap in the news. You see all these news stories just focusing in the wrong direction. But the reality is much different, right? Here we go. Value of aluminium ores, experts in millions of dollars versus 2024.
Well, so that millions is billions, so 12.8 billion. So that's a pretty decent, you think about it. Something like education, which is sold as an export, is around 21 billion. And that's the third largest. So that's gold. It's a top 5, top 6 export, aluminium ores. And that's, but the standout countries are Taiwan, well as China, is Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Oman. So guess what? Australia's aluminium exporters are going duty-free in the Middle East and Asia, and they're ignoring Trump's tariffs, which are the value of aluminium ores to the United States in 2024, 60 million.
Tiny.
Exactly.
How does that compare with iron? What about iron ore?
Iron ore is around it's $7 or $8 billion, $9 billion a month. Exports are $72 billion, $75 billion annually. I mean, some years it gets up to 100.
So it's less than the aluminium.
No. So the aluminium is 12.9 for 2024. Iron ore is around 80 billion to 90 billion on any given year. Probably closer to 110, 120 in more recent times. But the reality is mining doesn't employ that many people, but it's the magic ingredient is the fact that it's an upstream commodity. There's lots of it. The volumes are massive. The problem for iron ore exporters, and particularly mines in Western Australia, is that you've got one major customer and that's it. Whereas in that aluminium case, 40% of those exports go to the Middle East. Canada, by a significant margin, buys more aluminium ores than the United States. So that's the point. And so there's you got to be able to dig below the headline as opposed to wiping $20 billion off your stock market because the fund managers in Sydney were too lazy to look at the real detail. So there we are.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so cost of energy, we've talked about that. Cost of government, we've talked about that. Cost of labour is the other problem. We just can't seem to get a manufacturing industry going.
No.
And we never will, I suppose. I mean, what?
Build robots and be done with it. We cannot do manufacturing. Even advanced manufacturing will never be able to compete with the Germans or the Japanese or the Swiss. Okay? Why? Because we don't have a culture of it. And it takes decades to build a capability to satisfy it. So look at what we do well, and do value add for what we do well. And that's
Okay.
and that's
Are our wages too high? I mean, people are arguing, the unions are screaming that wages haven't kept up with inflation. I mean, as if wages are supposed to keep up with inflation. I don't know that they are. Otherwise, you wind up with an inflationary spiral. But anyway,
I would say our wages are probably, to be honest, I think they're reflective of a tax system, of a poorly designed tax system, which gives an artificially high headline. So yeah, there's more in the space, if you know what I mean.
so you're saying if there was less income tax, that would bring the amount of take-home pay up without business having to pay for it.
It just has to be flipped. That's all.
Yeah. Okay. So higher GST, you would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. Slash it all.
Doesn't putting up the GST then have a deflationary? A recessionary impact on the economy overall? Isn't that going to make people not want to spend?
Well, I suppose the alternative is continue doing more of the same, where people are belt tightening anyway. More discretionary income gives you choice. We don't have choice when we're giving away 30% of the take-home pay to the government. So we don't have any choice, right? So there's no.
Of course. So if you're taking home more and you put the GST up, you've still got more. You've still got as much buying power, and you've got more control over it.
Exactly. You know what? Find a solution. You know what I mean? That's how it encourages more of a solution. And guess what? We'd actually be in line with the OECD if we did that.
Wow. Okay. So, all right. So all of those things, I mean, the cost of energy is being driven up by net zero policy, I would say.
Correct. There's no question about that. Like, it doesn't. Well, it's not working, and that's what that's what we're finding out. I mean, and like shutting down coal power stations has not worked. So there we are.
Cost of labour is primarily, it's tax policy, but also wage policy. I suppose that's kind of a left wing issue. If you're a union, obviously, you care about labour costs being higher. You want them higher. Cost of government, obviously, we've talked about obviously as a left wing thing, because you've got the cost of government expansion. So really, what we're dealing with here is this conflation of three drivers that are predominantly aligned with left wing ideology and philosophy, of net zero, high labour cost, high wages, and big government. And we need to tackle one or two or three of those if we're going to get out of this mess of the cost of living crisis. But everything is masked because nobody wants to talk about it.
We need to break our reform recession. That's it.
Explain that to me.
Well, we keep kicking when it comes to significant economic reform, it's in the too hard basket, and we keep kicking the can down the road. And the reform is, we need to reform government, federation, tax code, industry policy, housing policy, and flip the script, because that's the only way you start to do things. So there we are.
We're kicking the can down the road because no political will, right? I mean, as we were talking about before, it comes back to the Liberal Party not wanting to be strong.
Well, yeah,
we're seeing it we've seen the demise, absolute destruction of the Conservative Party in the UK. Reform, Nigel Farage's party is now polling above the Conservatives in some polls, I understand. That's extraordinary. I mean, that's only been around for like a year or two, that party. That is extraordinary.
Yeah, but
in Canada, even. Sorry, mate. Go ahead.
Oh, just like in the Nigel Farage case, it's the Nigel Farage party. I mean, if he goes, then it's still very much a party that leads.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a lot of issues. Yeah, sure. There's a lot of issues with that party. I'm just saying, as a benchmark, as a kind of a indicator, that's pretty extraordinary stuff. Mm-hmm. We're seeing the AfD in Germany, obviously, the more right-wing party in Germany rising. I won't call it far right because that's to sort of be excessively negative about it, I think. I don't think they're trying to cast that, put it in that pigeonhole, but it's not. It's just a normal right-wing party. It's certainly not centre-right, but it's right-wing. You've got that happening in Germany. You've got that happening in the UK. You've got Conservative Party of Canada, the leader Pierre Poilievre doing really, really well in all of the polls, right? Because he's being much stronger on these issues. He's being more Trump-like than Peter Dutton. So there was a state election, by-election in Victoria last weekend or weekend before in the electorate of Werribee, which is I think West Melbourne electorate, somewhere between Melbourne and Geelong.
Labor heartland.
Labor heartland. And if I can just bring up, we've got the ABC's webpage here. We can quickly have a squiz at that, I think. So this is kind of an indicator of, what people are looking at this as a bellwether for, where the mood is at the moment. And there you have it. Once the preferences are distributed, the Liberal Party looks as though it's going to end up with 49.4% of the vote, and the Labor Party with 50.6%. But we're seeing a swing from Labor of 10% there to the Liberals. If we go to the first preference count before you distribute preferences, and we just have a look at these top performers, we can see that the Liberal candidate actually had a swing to him of 3.7 only. And got 11,578 and finished first past the post there. But of course, won't win it probably unless after the preference allocation. But the ALP's John Lister, 11,448, and a minus 16.7% swing against. 16.7% swing against in Labor heartland. That is a sign that, there are horrible things to come, right? For Anthony Albanese.
But they're clearly going to be a drag on the federal vote. Now remember, Victoria and New South Wales didn't even nominate candidates until 6 weeks out from the last federal poll. That's how bad the Liberal Party was in those states. The LNP had all their candidates well out in the things like 18 months ahead of time. So we can say what we want about the LNP, but their party machines clearly learnt off Labor, right? Clearly. And so I think, if anything, that brand Labor is definitely terminal. Remember, the Liberal Party in Victoria and New South Wales is, if whoever wins 25 seats in New South Wales, if the coalition win 25 seats in New South Wales, it's over. Don't even bother about WA. It's fine. It's done. That's basically where it's done, right? And here's the thing, they could actually still pick up a seat or two still 2 or 3 seats in Queensland, the Liberal Party, which is extraordinary. I mean, so, for Labor, their support base is becoming more narrow. Their preference flows. So, for example, the frenemy thing is starting to work against them. They can't if they preference the Greens, they're actually, Labor members are losing. And people who vote, people, particularly centre-right Labor voters, are here going, they can't stomach the idea of the Greens. And so, I think Labor's got a big, they've got a 30% primary vote, right? And that's in a good year, 31%. They have to come up with a way to conjure up how to grow their primary vote. I can't see how they'll do it. There's no way they can do it. So unless, for example, they knock the lights out in Victoria? WA is their strongest state at the moment. A mining state, and it's going to be very difficult. So they're the tea leaves, Damian, from this part of the world, I'd say.
Well, people are saying that that there's a independent Paul Hopper that picked up 8% of that, or almost 9% of that vote from Labor. And they're saying that he's the reason behind that collapse. I'd say he's only part of the reason, or maybe, because it was local issues that people are feeling that, out there in those suburbs, they're sick of being overlooked and they want better roads, they want more transport options, etc. But, if you look at this guy, this independent Mr. Hopper, he's a local car dealer, and it's his second time standing as an independent. And he took half of that 17% that Labor lost. So, that's pretty extraordinary. I don't know, what side of sort of the political spectrum Mr. Hopper leans, but it would seem to me if he's a small business guy, and comes from a family in the area that is extremely well known. That goes back. There's a suburb called Hopper's Crossing, I think, that was named after his ancestors in 1911. So it kind of goes back a bit. Their connection to Werribee. He's been described in the media as a fitness fanatic who hits the gym daily. He sounds like sort of your classic, small business guy who your classic traditional, probably liberal.
And you know why? And do you know why they're like that? It's because they're not owned by anybody. They don't have to be owned by anybody. They're their own people. That's what makes them authentic. That's what the thing is. The Republicans don't own Trump, for example. It's the other way around.
Well, I'm very sceptical of I'm pessimistic about Australia's prospects of cracking the two-party system, and I really do believe that. If you want reform, you've got to work it within the major parties to get that reform in a sensible and balanced way. But maybe, I don't know. Maybe there is a trend. People's frustration is at a point where I thought it was going to be the last federal election, but it wasn't, I don't think, as much as I thought it was going to be. A lot of people did think it was going to be pretty high, but it wasn't. And people tended to still vote for the major parties. But maybe there is going to be more of a swing to independents and minor parties this time around.
Perhaps. But, as soon as that unemployment figure has a 6 in front of it, they'll tend to go back to what they know.
That's all right. All right, mate. Well, we've had a long one, but it's been really interesting covering all those issues and having a chat. So, great to talk to you. Hopefully, we can talk to you again on Unplugged in the near future.
Cheers, Damian.
Dan Petrie. Mate, your website, by the way, if you want.
Well, it's coming up. It's charteconomy.com, so it'll be released by the end of February. So on board.
Oh, okay, right. So so charteconomy.com, and that's basically going to be an opportunity somewhere where people can go and just chart anything they want.
They'll be able to chart major economic data, bit of some stocks and some FX, but they can build their own charts and pretty cheap and I wouldn't say nasty, but just cheap. So, yeah.
Of course not. All right, well, there you go. Bit of a plug there. All right, mate. Thanks a lot. We'll see you again soon. Right. Take care.
Okay. Cheers. Okay.
The other side doesn't get more than $1 billion of taxpayers' money to bring you news from a centre-right perspective like the ABC does to bring you news from a left-wing perspective. In fact, we don't get a red cent from the government. We need voluntary donors and supporters like you to keep going and growing. And we hate asking for charity, so we've done a deal with what we think is the world's best VPN, virtual private network service. It'll keep you and your family truly safe without slowing down your internet speeds, and you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. And you can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and get more info. That's piavpn.com/otherside.
The Other Side with Damian is Australia's best independent news commentary show. As we enter our 5th year, we're going to be bringing you more content via our YouTube and X channels at Other Side Oz with The Other Side Unplugged. More content when it matters, but only when it matters, so you don't miss a thing. Subscribe now to our YouTube channel at Other Side Oz by clicking the button and the bell below the picture frame. And follow us on X now at Other Side Oz. That's AUS at Other Side Oz. It's free. This is The Other Side. Stay in touch. Check out our independent website at othersidetv.com.au. You can sign up for free there too, or join the exclusive side and help support our show for less than $5 a month.